Hello, good evening, everybody. Good evening and good morning. We are spiritually, we're in morning, we're in the morning time, even though it is evening here in Los Angeles and probably most of the places that you are. We are investigating the morning. We're praying our way through the morning. We're kind of moving our way through morning prayers. And in particular, the very first prayers of the morning, we've talked about the prayers that you say immediately when you open your eyes in the morning. And we talked about the blessings that we make over washing our hands, going to the bathroom, putting on sacred garments, talit and tefillin. And now we have a problem. Now we have a problem because we arrive now at, a standard Jewish prayer, maybe the standard Jewish prayer of the morning, one of the most spiritually potent and meditative and interesting Jewish prayer rituals that is absolutely standard and essential. It's really, as we're covering the essential prayers in the Siddur, we certainly have to talk about Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings. But Birchot HaShachar also contains perhaps the most offensive Jewish text of all. I mean, not just the Jewish prayer, which, it's a standard complaint. I look over in the English and I don't really like what it's saying there. Warlike God, what's going on? Are these really our prayers? There are all kinds of, this is the question that recurs in our study of Jewish prayer. How do we think about these prayers that we don't relate to and maybe we're even bothered by? But the morning blessings has at least one line that is almost like in the modern period, and certainly in my lifetime and my attempt to talk about my religion with other people, this line has really stands out as one of the most offensive and hard to justify, hard to explain away. So what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that one of our most beautiful and core prayers also contains in it something that I think many of us find it virtually impossible to say? Okay, so tonight we're going to try to do both things at once. We're going to try to learn the blessings, the prayers themselves, which are so important and so central to the morning prayer experience, and also try to figure out what to do with this glaring difficulty. Okay, so with that said, let's say a blessing now over our Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. One of the things we thank God for as we enter into Torah study is creating a space where we can struggle with all of the difficulties in our textual tradition, try to find some resolve, some harmony. So grateful for this space. Okay. The morning blessings, Birchot HaShachar, they are, as I said, standard, they're classic, they're essential. There are, we've talked about this, there are a lot of prayers that are placed before the preparatory prayers, we call them, before we head into Psuke de Zimra, the section of Psalms that we say, which is in itself before the Shema, which is in itself before the Amidah. So we've kind of we've built some of the major building blocks, and now we're jumping back to the start and looking at these preparatory prayers. And there's a lot there in the beginning. If you flipped open your Siddur, you would see, for example, the reading of the binding of Isaac, which some people say every single day. Long section detailing the incense and the offerings, the exact offerings that they would offer every day in the temple, reciting all of those. But we're not going to cover every single thing that we find in the Siddur. There's just too much there. And I'm trying also to indicate what is really, really essential. And the morning blessings are really, really essential. Okay. Well, actually, you know what? I don't want to describe them or get into them. We'll learn them in their original source eventually. I want to just start reading them just so that you have the experience, if you haven't had it before, or just to have the experience again of beginning to say these prayers and all of a sudden encountering like, whoa, that's in my Siddur, that's in my tradition. What do I do with that? Okay, so let's take a look here. Here's a source sheet for you, and let's take a look together. So the morning blessings begin very beautifully. No problem with the first blessing. Okay, blessed are you, and I took all of the translations that they gave me on Safari. I didn't retranslate today because I just want you to get the standard translations as well as the standard liturgy. Okay, no filters today. Okay, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who gives the rooster understanding to distinguish between day and night. Wow, what a cool thought. Blessing God for that strange thing that the rooster knows when the morning is coming and starts, starts the cock-a-doodle-doo, and like that's an incredible thing that the earth is. We could meditate on this. We will meditate on this. This is a great way to start our morning ruminations, meditations. Okay, great. We're all set. And then we get to the next one. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who did not make me a Gentile. A goy is the word here. Shelo asani goy. Now, that's not the offensive line that I was talking about, though we may already be rattled. All right, what are you, like, why are we talking about the Gentiles? Thank God I'm not a Gentile. But maybe at least we could say, hey, okay, the wording is a little funny, and I'm a universalist. I love all human beings, but like maybe even I could say, well, it's okay for a tradition to celebrate our participation in this tradition. Isn't it just another way of saying, thank God I'm a Jew, I get to be a Jew, isn't it? Okay, it's not the best formulation, but okay, I could, in the world of apologetics, I could explain this away. Okay, here comes another blessing. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who did not make me a slave. Well, okay, that sounds good, I guess. I don't want to be a slave. It's a bit of a jump, not making me a Gentile to not making me a slave. What category are we in here anyway? But I'm no longer feeling like this is the most inspiring. Look at the rooster, knowing the time of day. Now thank God I'm not a Gentile. Thank God I'm not a slave. And then here it comes, this line, almost infamous, I think, in our day and age, is, blessed are you, Adonai, King of the universe, who did not make me a woman. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shelo asani isha. Here it is in the Hebrew. Who did not make me a woman. Okay? And that's like, whoa. Like that's in the Siddur. Every day, Jewish men wake up every morning and say, thank God I'm not a woman. Thank God I'm not a woman. Woo! All right, let's get our day started. So, I mean, it's almost impossible to recover, I think, from that moment, at least in this our age of feminism. This moment in our journey as human beings, when we have, I think, had all kinds of revelations in this last couple of centuries that have totally refashioned our world, or is in the process of refashioning our social landscape. And certainly, like a formulation like this, it's not just like, oh, Jewish men do this and Jewish women do this. It's not just like there are different roles. It's a different paradigm. This is like, thank God I'm not a woman. Okay. So, okay, there's more here, but as I said, it's a little hard to, like, I can't just teach this and just, oh, anyway, don't worry about that one. There's more here and we will get to it. But this is almost it's almost like a showstopper. But let's take a look at what else is there. And then we'll go back and try to figure out this problem. I think it's safe to say this appears as a problem for many of us in our Siddur. And I should say, it doesn't appear in many of our Siddurim. The ones that you'll find at Ikar don't have that. So you may have heard, oh yeah, that prayer, but it got taken out. So how does that happen? And we'll try to answer that question as well before our time is up. Okay, so let's just finish the list just so we see what else is there. So we said, thank God for not making me a Gentile, a goy, an eved, and an isha, a Gentile, a slave, and a woman. And then it goes on, oh, and before we move on, as if this helps. So wait a minute, what do women say? What do they say? They just skip the blessing? Well, a parallel blessing was written for them, and a woman says, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who made me according to his will. Okay, so men say, thank God I'm not a woman, and women say, well, I am the way I am. And it's actually, by the way, it's not a bad blessing. Shasani Kirtsono, that's a beautiful blessing, but it doesn't feel like it meets the moment of like why, you know, what women are just sort of grateful for the way they are, and men are grateful that they're not women, right? Like that's like, okay, that doesn't solve any problems for us, but there it is. That's the other blessing. Okay, and now we go, in some ways, we start to pick up again. Look at these, but these are great blessings. Blessed are you who gives sight to the blind. Blessed are you who clothes the naked. Blessed are you who releases the imprisoned. Blessed are you who straightens the bent. Blessed are you who spreads the earth above the waters. Blessed are you who provided me with all my needs. Blessed are you who prepares the steps of man. Blessed are you who girds Israel with might. Blessed are you who crowns Israel with glory. And then blessed are you who gives strength to the weary. Now, those are nice. Those are nice blessings. We kind of got back into the rhythm there. Those are nice blessings. But okay, first, as I said, we got to deal with those issues raised by the second, third, and fourth blessing. But also, even as we start to read the rest of the blessings, just as students of this text, we might ask other questions like, okay, these are nice, but why these? Like, what are these doing here? What is the nature of these blessings? Why do I have to be girded with strength? Or, you know, why is it so important to remember that God releases the bound at this moment? Oh, it's great that God releases the bound, but what's going on there? Okay, so with all of those dilemmas and questions in our field of vision here, we're going to go now immediately, before we start to talk about these blessings, and this isn't just going to be an angsty, Judaism has offensive texts, what do we do? We are going to have an opportunity to just meditate on the prayer experience itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the source. Where do these blessings come from? They come from a passage in the Talmud, and that passage in the Talmud is going to quickly begin to answer a lot of our questions. Okay, we're going to have to keep going, and we may not get all of our questions answered before the end of the night, but this piece in the Talmud immediately will start to change our perspective on the morning blessings, Birchot HaShachar. Okay, so I'm going to move forward just a little bit more before I start taking interpretations, but any clarifying questions so far? Anything not clear or anything that, yeah? No, okay, great. Let me just post this in the chat one more time, just so folks have, if they came late. Here's the Safaria sheet. And now I want to take you into the place in the Talmud from whence these blessings come. And it's from the first tractate in the Talmud, Brachot, which I told you is the tractate where they're working out the prayers page after page. It's an incredible resource for seeing the origin of the prayers. Okay, take a look at this formulation, which will give you a sense of where these prayers come from, and also, as I said, immediately change our sense of what this list is. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, here we are. Okay, now we're in Tractate Brachot at the end, towards the end of Tractate Brachot, and this is the advice that the rabbis offer. Upon hearing the sound of the rooster, one should recite, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who gave the heart. Here, I just wanted to show you this, and now I'm going to correct it. This word, this is an aside, okay? This word sechvi is a word that is debated. Nobody's quite sure exactly what it means. It appears in the book of Job, and there's some inclination that the rabbis have to translate it as heart or mind, but I think it's because the word looks like sechel, which is another word for the mind. And I think, there's some, are they related, or was there some printing error or something? But other sources in rabbinic literature say no, in Arabic lands, a sechvi is a rooster. Now, then you have a different problem. Why are they using an Arabic word, or not an Arabic word, but some Semitic word? But it'll just be easier. You saw it above as rooster. So I just wanted to show you that word has multiple translations. Is it that God gave me and my heart the ability to distinguish between day and night? Or is it, and I think it makes more sense in context here, upon hearing the sound of the rooster, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who gave the rooster understanding to distinguish between day and night." Okay, that's just an aside, an interesting one, but we'll leave it there. Okay, the Talmud continues. Upon opening one's eyes, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who gives sight to the blind." Okay, upon opening one's eyes. That's actually, nowadays, we say this, we say modeh ani when we open our eyes. We talked about that, but the Talmud is recommending this the moment that you open your eyes. Upon sitting up straight, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who sets captives free," or literally releases the bound. Okay, now that I've showed you the original, I feel entitled to retranslate. Who releases the bound. Okay, that'll make more sense. Upon dressing, one should recite, "Blessed is God who clothes the naked." Upon standing up straight, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who raises those bowed down." It's, again, that's not a great, let's call it straightens the bent. The bent over. I guess that it is hard to translate it. It's for someone who's stooped over. Upon descending from one's bed to the ground, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who spreads the earth above the waters." Upon walking, one should recite, "Blessed are you, who makes firm the steps of man." Upon putting on one's shoes, there's a blessing for putting on your shoes. Upon putting on your shoes, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who has provided me with all I need," including this old brown shoe. I was just watching Get Back last night, so I'm thinking about that George Harrison song, "This Old Brown Shoe." Upon putting on his belt, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who girds Israel with strength." Oh, that's where the language of girding comes from. Okay. And upon spreading a shawl upon his head, we talked about doing this last week. Upon putting a talit over your head, one should recite, "Blessed are you, God, who crowns Israel with glory." And that's it. Okay, those are the blessings that are offered to us in the Talmud. Now, that already tells us a lot, because what is the first thing that we notice about this list when we compare it to the last list? Not there. The Shelo asani isha, you've not made me a woman, is not there. But neither is the not made me a Gentile and not made me a slave. Those aren't there. That's not part of the original list. Okay, phew. I mean, that's already one step. The original, wherever these other three blessings come from, they don't come from the original list of blessings that we say in the morning. Okay, so given that, that's the first step in our understanding or reckoning with those other blessings. We're going to table those for now, and we'll come back to them. Okay, we're going to deal with this problem eventually. For now, I would like to just take some time. The morning blessings, as they appear in the Talmud, suddenly appear quite beautiful. I love this list. I don't have any problems with it at all. Okay, so let's think a little bit about what's going on there in the Talmud. What are the morning blessings? What is it describing? What are you doing? What's the ritual here that the prayer ritual the rabbis are suggesting. Can someone describe it for us, or tell us what's going on in this passage in the Talmud with this person waking up in the morning? Yeah.
It's gratitude.
Good. Susan. It's gratitude for what, Susan?
I mean, for everything that Hashem provides, per se.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good start.
You're alive. You've got clothing. You've got shelter. You've got health. All those things. You've got sight. All the wonderful things that we have that, if we didn't have them, would be not so lovely.
Okay. Perfect. So that's certainly part of what's going on here. It is a morning accounting of the things that you suddenly find yourself to have and are grateful for.
And if I may, sorry to interrupt you, but it also makes the mundane sacred. So it takes that, regular getting out of bed, putting on your shoes, whatever it may be, it elevates it to a little bit.
Great. So now you give us the other half, Susan. You give us the spiritual reason, which is just the summoning of gratitude for everything that I have, my faculties, my bed itself, the clothes that I have. But Susan starts to describe the movement. And that seems really critical to this ritual, is that it's one that is happening in real time. As you sit up, you say, releases the bound, right? As you stand up, you say, straightens over the bent. As you put on your shoe, you say, has given me everything I need. Meaning this shoe right here, thanks for this shoe. Thanks for the rooster outside, right? Thanks for, I open my eyes. Okay, I can see. Again, I can see. Thank you for that. So part of what we come to see when we look at the source is that the idea of the morning blessings is that you would be saying, you were blessing your way through the morning, right? Every little thing you do, all of those little rituals, like just rolling over in bed, just putting your feet on the ground, there's a blessing for that. There's a blessing for that. There's a blessing for that. Okay. And so your whole first movements of the morning are just movements of that are noted with gratitude and blessed. Okay. So that's important to understand how the morning blessings are kind of supposed to function. In the medieval period, there's a decision that they really ought to be said together by the congregation in shul, and so they get transferred into the Siddur and into shul. That's like a summary of a whole liturgical historical process. But you can however that process worked, you can see originally what it's intended. This is before shul. This is before your prayers. This is just in your home as you're literally in your bedroom. Okay, Florine, can you add to this?
Well, I was going to agree with her that there's a physicality of the movement, which is a movement into prayer itself. And the second question I have is, between the two versions, could you give me the dates approximately that they were introduced? Because I think it's a big difference.
What's that?
I think it might make a big difference.
It does make a difference. Yeah, that's a good question. And I must say I'm terrible at dates in general, as many yeshiva students are. But the Talmud is a document that's composed, roughly between the 2nd and 6th centuries of the Common Era, like 200 to 600. So what we see in the Talmud is completed by the year 600. Let's say, that I'm speaking in broad strokes here, but around then. The prayer book that we have in front of us is still not fully formulated in the medieval period. The medieval rabbis are themselves discussing what to do with the Talmudic material and how to transform it into a Siddur. And it's in the medieval period. There is a Siddur that appears like in the space between the 6th century and the medieval period. Medieval, I'm talking about like 10th, 11th, 12th century. There is a Siddur that we know of that appears between them, but the real formulation of the Siddur, as we know, it starts to happen in the medieval period, and is continually. I mean, the Siddur we have is just like an increasing collection of more and more and more over the years. But that's roughly the answer. Ariella?
Well, to me, it's every little thing that we do can be traced back to God. And so it's like taking the mundane and making that and elevating that to the sacred.
Great. Okay, so it isn't just gratitude. It's gratitude, as is often the case in our tradition, gratitude to God. God has given me all these things, and there's a consciousness that's being summoned here. I thank God. God's the reason there's a rooster outside. Rooster didn't wake me up. God woke me up. God's the reason that I have shoes. I bought these shoes, but God gave me the energy that allowed me to make the money to earn these shoes. God does everything for me. And certainly the fact that I have sight, that comes from God. Okay. But wait a minute. It doesn't actually say, oh, I have sight. It doesn't say that. And here's the other thing that I want to explore a little with you all. The language of the blessings was at first not so clear to us because it didn't bless God for giving me sight. It blessed God for giving sight to the blind. Well, I'm not blind. It didn't bless God for letting me get out of bed. It blessed God for releasing the bound. Well, that sounds like freeing captives. That doesn't sound like getting me out of bed. So what's going on there? Like, what do you make of the fact that though the Talmud is clearly noting little moments of movement through your morning, it puts the expression in those blessings in very lofty language. Like, here's an example. I descend from my bed and I don't say, thank God that there's a floor to walk on. I say, thank God who spreads the earth above the waters. That's like Genesis language. So what do you think is happening? And I think Florine, Ariella, Susan have done a great job of kind of opening up the spiritual potency of this kind of morning blessing movement. But why this language, which is so grand for something so minute? Kathy?
Well, I'm not sure this explains all of them, but I do feel like a lot of it is recapitulating creation. You know, in other words, the morning as it's because it's like light and darkness, day and night, distinguishing day and night. Also, who spreads the earth above the water. So that's all, you know, like you say, Genesis language. But I think it's that recapitulation of, you know, the new day and the whole returns my moda ani is like creation. Also returns my breath to me, kind of recapitulates. You know, being given breath. But like I say, I'm not sure that really explains all of it, but it gets us into that. We keep talking about the spiral of creation, the new day, the new year. They all keep turning around and reminding.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Okay, good. So that's Kathy herself says, like, I don't know, this doesn't explain everything, but some of the lofty language can be attributed to the attempt of our prayers in general to situate us in a kind of a larger scheme in which every day is a new creation, and every day allows me to begin again. We see this, for example, very clearly in Havdalah, have the separation prayer after the Shabbat. When we begin a new week, a lot of that ritual is meant to evoke the moment where God first creates light, right? So too, Kathy says, there's a kind of, even in the little getting up in the morning moment, what I'm trying to summon is like, everything is beginning again. We are getting started again. It's a whole new day. And so I'm summoning some of that language. Okay, but there's more to figure out here, right? Like, God frees the bound. God straightens the bent. God, okay, what do you think is going on with some of that lofty language? Okay, putting that question out there. I'll turn again to our interpreters. Matt? Oh, Matt put his hand down because he's smart. He's like, I'm not answering that question.
But I'll take a piece of that. because what I would say is this seems like when people do their daily affirmations and it's starting your day and you have two directions to go and you can, I got to take a piss and I got to find some food or, oh my God, look how wonderful. So it's just pure psychology. Start me off with grand and wonderful and maybe I can, keep that going for a couple of hours. Until the coffee kicks in. So I think that's part of it. And it is recapitulating. And it's also, I was lying in bed and I couldn't move and I was down and I had blankets over me and it was dark. And now I'm, so it is recapitulating that, but it's make it as big as you can because maybe it'll work.
Okay, I love that. Matt, are you a morning person?
Not even close.
Me neither, man. I could hear it. I could hear it in your voice, because like what you're describing, I'm like, yes, you're so right. Because waking up in the morning sucks. I hate it. Every morning's like, creaking my way out of bed. And like Matt's message here that this is really an important moment to redirect your psychology. That's an important word. That really resonates with me. This moment, which can be I'm like, like I hate the first minutes of the day and my mouth still tastes funny and I'm grumpy. I wake up grumpy, just because waking up itself is not, some people pop out of bed, but Matt and I don't. And so this is an opportunity to say, wait a minute. I am walking. I am seeing. Like, this is good. Like I need to get into a gratitude space, right? So for you night owls out there like me and Matt, it's just like this really hits. Leah Matsui?
I'm definitely a morning person. And yet any given morning, I wake up enslaved with all this extraneous debris in my mind. I wake up blind, not literally blind, but blind to a lot of to reality. I wake up terrified, totally without courage, and I wake up exhausted, although I've slept. So I feel like these are breadcrumbs that the sages left for me. How many thousands of years later? Leah, you might need this.
Yeah, beautifully put. Payam?
I feel like the Talmud's making an equivalency argument that these are these grand things, and we always see these grand things as these miraculous things. But these very minute, mundane things are also miraculous. That the two are equal in their miraculousness. That, it starts you off like you are a miracle. Every small thing you do, it might not seem miraculous, but it actually is. So the two are equal.
Good. Okay, so part of what I'm hearing emerge from these initial interpretations is that the power of this ritual is that it is the movement itself, the fact that it blesses you through the morning. It creates this way of coming into the morning through gratitude and blessing and reorienting your psychology, as Matt said. That's happening, and then the language takes the gratitude for those little things and expands them by connecting them to God, expands them by just noting how miraculous they are, and expands them in some very kind of like in the scale of the things we're talking about. That is, I am grateful that I have sight, and for all sight, and for God's power to give sight, and God's power to return sight in some cases. And I want to get big here. I want to think about how big this is. Okay. All right. I'm going to pause here from taking further comments because I do want to get back to I don't want to, I highlighted some of those more problematic blessings, and I want to figure out where they come from. Now, in some way, here's what we're not going to do by the end of our hour. We're not going to prove that, like, don't worry, Judaism has no sexism in it, and like, it wasn't a patriarchy, don't worry about it, everything's okay. We're not going to do that. And Judaism does have patriarchy and sexism in it, and the entire world did back then, and we're not going to resolve that. But what I do want to do is to try and think about whether these prayers, which are so glaringly difficult for modern ears. Are they? I guess ears. Yeah. Okay. Glaring and ears. That's the wrong metaphor. I'm a famous metaphor mixer. That's like that's one of the things you'll notice. But I do want to try and figure out, well, what do we do with this, and how easy is it to say, oh, we don't have to say these prayers, or we can change these prayers, and I mean, if I feel somewhat obligated by this sweep of tradition, what, okay, I don't like that one blessing. Do I get to just not? I mean, of course, everybody can, do what they want in this age of choice, but I want to investigate, even from the perspective of the tradition, just how, just what is the status of these blessings, and particularly Shelo Asani Isha, the blessing of thanking God for not making me a woman. So where does that come from? Well, that isn't, as Florine was wondering, a later interpolation. That is, the appearance in the morning blessings does come later, but the blessings themselves also appear in the Talmud, but they appear in an entirely different passage. Okay, so this passage is a little more complicated, but I think it is important for us to learn it together. It is also not beautiful in the way that the last passage was. It is in itself offensive, but it's an important offensive for us to look at, because there's clues in here about just how important these blessings are and what the possibilities for saying them are. Okay, so let's take a look. This is a little bit of a puzzle that we have to solve, and we're kind of what we'll be doing is kind of collecting evidence along the way, at the end of which we should have a pretty solid case for changing or removing the blessing of not making me a woman. So take a look here. Okay, here's the other section of the Talmud. It is taught, Tanya, Rabbi Meir said, Rabbi Meir, one of the great sages of the Talmud, said, a person is obligated to recite these three blessings every day. Okay, and these are the blessings. Who made me an Israelite, right? Blessed are you, God, whom Asani Israel, who made me an Israelite. Who did not make me a woman, and who did not make me an ignoramus. And the word in Hebrew or Aramaic is actually boor, and frankly, I suspect that's related to the English word boor, a boor. I'm not sure of that, but I suspect that they're related because it does mean essentially the same thing. Ignoramus, I guess, is a fine translation, but someone who doesn't know things. Okay. Now, before we even move forward, what do you notice so far? Now, this is the source for our earlier blessings, but what's different about them? There are two things that are different. Two things that are different. Here, I'm just going to scroll back up so we can remind ourselves. The blessings above, the blessings above were, who did not make Shelo Asani Goy, who did not make me Gentile, Shelo Asani Aved, who did not make me a slave, and Shelo Asani Isha, who did not make me a woman. Now let's go back to the Talmud. Who made me an Israelite, who did not make me a woman, who did not make me an ignoramus, or a boor, right? An unlearned person, an uneducated person. Okay, so what do we notice there? And this is a sort of, identification question, but so I won't force you to raise your hand for it. But we notice that the first blessing is in the affirmative, not the negative. It doesn't say Shelo Asani Goy. It just doesn't say that. It says Asani Yisrael, who made me an Israelite. Well, I like that better. I mean, that seems like that's just a more positive way of putting it, right? Asani Yisrael. Now that's really important for us. Just as we begin to investigate these blessings and also wonder how much flexibility we have, when we go back to the original source, one of them is phrased in the Talmud differently. Asani Yisrael, who made me an Israelite. Okay, all right. So that's the one thing. What's the other thing we notice? The other thing is that it didn't say who has not made me a slave. Instead, it said who has not made me a boor, an ignorant person, a person who doesn't know, presumably, Torah. Okay, these are rabbis talking. So they study the Torah. Thank God I'm not a person who's not a part of this, who doesn't know how to study the Torah. Okay, all right. So that's the source. And even in that source, we see, wow, well, I mean, it already looks different than what I've got in my Sidur, but it does have Shelo Asani Isha there. Okay. Let's now keep going in the Talmud. So now, interestingly, the rabbi, there's a rabbi who has a problem with one of these blessings, but it's not Shelo Asani Isha. It's not who has not made me a woman. He's bothered by another one of the blessings. So it's Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov, who heard his son reciting the blessing, who did not make me ignoramus. And he said to him, Kuli hai nami, you really go so far? Would you really, you make a blessing over this? And the response, here's the offensive part, but it's useful material for us. The response is, well, what blessing should I say instead? Should I say, who has not made me a slave? That blessing is just like who did not make me a woman. Okay, now let's just pause here for a second. It's interesting already because who did not make me a slave actually is the one that appears in the liturgy eventually. But the response of Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov's son is, well, I already said who did not make me a woman. That is a blessing for the same reason that I would say who did not make me a slave. Now that's interesting just in itself, because what is he saying about women's status and what is he saying that slaves and women have in common, right? So what's going on here? Like, this is a confusing dialogue. Rabbi Acha doesn't want him to say the blessing, who has not made me an ignoramus. And his son seems to assume that you have to say 3 blessings. I mean, because otherwise he could have just left it out, but he seems to say, well, I would have to replace it. And what am I going to replace it with? Don't make me a slave. That I don't need that. Okay, I don't need that blessing. Now, why don't you need that blessing? Okay, what is going on here in this blessing so far? And I want to I don't want to hide the ball here. I want to just give you the traditional understanding of this interchange. So let's just finish it first. First, there's one more line. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, no, that doesn't work. What you're saying, it's not true. They're not equivalent blessings because a slave is far more lowly, has far more lowly status than a woman. Okay, all right. I'm not suggesting that this is like pleasant reading, but it is important because there's a lot going on here. There's another blessing, and then another rabbi wants to push out that other blessing that we don't even have. And then there's an offering of a third possibility, but the rabbi's son says, but they would both be doing the same thing. Now, what is that same thing that they would be doing? Okay, well, here's what Rashi says, and most of our commentators say, you're not obligated to follow their interpretation, but their understanding of all of these blessings is, Rashi says, the reason is, do you really go so far to praise yourself for being an am haaretz? He uses a different term, an uneducated person. I understand the blessing for not being an idolater or a woman, since they are not obligated in all the commandments. And it is appropriate to bless on being obligated. But an ignoramus, someone who hasn't studied Torah, they're still obligated in the commandments. Okay? So I am not offering this as a kind of panacea. Oh, well, great, there's no problem. But it is important to note that the traditional rabbis, when they looked at this discussion and these blessings, what they assumed was these are blessings about having the mitzvot. These are blessings about the commandments. And men would get up and they would say, thank you for making me a Jew, a free Jew, and a male Jew because I do all of the commandments. And that's what they're blessing on. Now, again, there's more work to do here, but that's an important moment as well, because the rabbis do not understand this as a blessing that's like, ugh, women. Like, I don't want to be a woman. They understand this to be a kind of acknowledgement of one's status in the community as someone who is is further obligated. Okay, so that's not yet our last step, but let's pause here. I see a hand from Alexandra.
I'm sort of addressing this tangentially, I think, and I really love this conversation and this class and all the comments so far. And to me, I find there's a difference in these three blessings from the previous blessings we discussed, in that these blessings are missing something that is so, to what I was taught about prayer, that is so essential to it, is that we use our prayers for the sake of others as well. So every aspect of those previous prayers was like, it's not just me opening my eyes, it's for God, please give this to everyone. Let me use all of my blessings, everything I'm grateful for, to enhance the world for everyone else as well. And so to me, these blessings are missing that which I understand, which for me is a very core principle of prayer, that every prayer is for the greater good, for the enlargement of all of humanity, not just the self. And that can be a minute thing can be for the enlargement of all humanity, but these to me show, and I am critical of the rabbis often, but it does show they're human. This is human interpretation. They were great thinkers, smart interpreters of the time, but they were not tzaddikim, all of them. There's a story of Rabbi Akiva and how he was so exalted for telling them to be nice to his wife, be nice to her, she's my wife, as telling his students. I'm sure you know this story better than I do, and I'm probably botching it. But he didn't say, be nice to her, she's a human being, which is what the consciousness of what a tzaddik would have said. He said, be nice to her because she's my wife, she belongs to me, she's part of me, not because she's a human being. And so it just shows to me that these prayers are made by smart people who were subject to some of the low-level thinking of their time, but the other prayers are just magnificent to me.
Okay, that's an important point in this investigation that we're doing, which is that these prayers don't come from the Torah. They're not divine. They were authored by human beings, and that's in itself an important place to start. And the rabbis, as you were saying, are human beings who lived long ago and had a culture that they were influenced by. However, it is still true that the rabbinic interpreters are the most authoritative voices in our tradition for how to understand the Torah and to legislate. So when they say something, even though we could contextualize it, it's still, especially when they say it as a binding obligation, it still requires us to figure out how much leeway we have here. I mean, of course, look, we're a spectrum of Jews in this learning who have very different relationships to obligation and practice. But I want to say, even within the context of obligation, we are starting to notice that these blessings, which first appear to us as I said, almost like kind of a showstopper, they actually are very different than the other blessings. I mean, that's where you started, Alexandra, and you're right. These three blessings come from a different source. In that source, they appear differently. And in the source where they appear differently, there's debate over which ones should be included and which ones not. So that in itself is a huge amount of information for us when we think about this list of blessings, that the original list actually seems preferable to us, and the insertions have all kinds of variations, even in the original, and all kinds of debates are laden with all kinds of debates, even in the original, okay? So with that said, I want to just in our last minutes here, give us a sense of how we might have gotten to this formulation that we have, and how over in recent Jewish history, how we have gotten out of it, okay? And there's a great article here that I'm going to give you a link to that basically does all of the hard work for us by a professor at the University of Calgary, Eliezer Siegel. And so first, I'm just going to give you a link to his very good article, but then there's an excerpt from it that we're going to look at. And this work would take us another hour to review. I was like trying to sift through and find all the sources, have to find sources in Plato and Paul and all, because so far what we've been doing is we've been looking within Jewish sources to see some of the indeterminacy even within Jewish sources. But now, if we start to look at extra Jewish material, then certain things start to click into place. In other words, there are other traditions that have similar formulations that may be influencing the rabbis when they formulate these blessings, and may be influencing later rabbis when they insert them into the morning blessings. So take a look at this very, very helpful summary here as we come to a close. By Eliezer Siegel, who I've never met, but I'm impressed with. So he says that it's important, he reviews some of the research that's happened since, and this is just an excerpt, but here's where it starts to get really important. An old liturgical fragment from the Cairo Geniza. What's the Cairo Geniza? It is a storehouse of texts that were preserved for hundreds and hundreds of years in Cairo. In a Geniza is like a holding place, a room at the bottom or the top of a shul of a synagogue in Cairo, long abandoned, was discovered in the 1890s by a group of people, a couple of eccentric twins in England, who then reported it to an eccentric scholar named Solomon Schechter, who went there and figured out what it all was. It's a great story. There's a book called Sacred Trash that covers the story, in case you're interested. But anyway, there's all kinds of texts and materials in the Cairo Geniza that are older than anything that we have, and that's what's important about them. So in the Cairo Geniza, there are fragments of the prayer book that contain a more positive formulation of the same themes. In other words, the prayers are written differently in different sidurs. And the one that Solomon Schechter found has, who has created me a human and not a beast, a man and not a woman, an Israelite and not a Gentile, circumcised and not circumcised, free and not slave. Now, I'm not suggesting this version is the one we should use. I just want to note that these are different. There's different wording here. First of all, it borrows from the positive formulation, who has made me, instead of who has not made me, right? So that already, you see that in Jewish sources, there are different ways of phrasing these blessings. Now, just to keep going, some scholars have suggested that the Apostle Paul was alluding to an early version of this blessing when he declared, and this is true, these are the words of Paul, as the New Testament records them, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female. And now this is interesting. Others have preferred to portray Rabbi Judah as reacting to Paul's words. In other words, other people speculate that the authors of the prayers themselves are wanting to push back on Paul. That's a theory that's out there. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying you're starting to see that there are other variations of a similar kind of formulation and potentially other reasons for instituting these prayers. Okay, I'm gonna jump a paragraph and then come back for one other theory, which is interesting, which is that several modern scholars, beginning with the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, have remarked on the uncanny parallel between the wording of the Jewish blessings and an ancient Greek tradition ascribed variously to, how do you say this? Thales, Thales, Socrates, or Plato. The sage in question was alleged, so they don't know who said it, but the sage in question was allegedly in the habit of thanking God for three things: that I was born a human and not a beast, a man and not a woman, a Greek and not a barbarian. Now, why is that important? Because the status of a free Greek male in Greek society was someone who had full rights in that society. And that becomes a kind of a standard for how grateful I am to be at the full status, the upper echelon of this society. Now, I'm not saying I've solved any of our problems here, but it is so important to note that not only are there many different formulations of this blessing in Jewish tradition, not only was it debated all the way from the start, but it is also possible that this blessing appears or is positioned partially as a negative response to Christianity, or partially as a positive response to Greek culture, which the rabbis admired very much. Now, that is interesting stuff, but I mention it all to say neither of those are good reasons to say blessings in the morning. Neither to be like Greeks or to not be like Christians, right? Those are polemics that appear in points in history because there are tensions or influences from one culture or another. But that Eliezer Siegel there gives you a very, very quick sense of the way that there's more going on to this triad of I'm a free Greek male or I'm a free Jewish male. And there's more going on there than we fully understand just by reading the blessings. And I hope you've seen at least that there's definitely a lot of wiggle room to play with these blessings, if nothing greater than the fact that the Talmud itself says, She'asani Yisrael, who has made me an Israelite, and not who has not made me a Gentile. That's the Talmud. So with that context in mind and with the Talmud at our back, right, then we can come to understand how we get to the blessings that we use at Ikar and that the conservative movement, given all of this material, eventually came to formulate. And I'll sort of close with this. I'm going to jump back a paragraph and show you that the American conservative movement opted to replace the negative formulation with an affirmation of what we are, free, Jewish, and instead of male, created in God's image, which after all borrows from the female version, Shasani Kirtzano, who made me in his will, right? So there too, there's authentic source material that we're drawing from. In making this change, they could cite the precedent of the Geniza text cited above, as well as the text of yet another, the Rome Machzor, which reads, She'asani Yisrael, who has made me an Israelite. Okay, so that's a very quick version of the history, complicated history of this blessing. There's more to do there, more to think about, but I hope that you've gotten an appreciation of these blessings separate from the most problematic ones. The blessings themselves in their original form are glorious and totally devoid of those other three. And I hope you've also gotten a sense of the history of those blessings, the debate over those blessings, and the possibility for reformulating them. And this I'll end with are the ways that they appear in our morning Sidur and in most conservative Sidurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael, who has made me a Jew. There's that phrasing which comes straight from the Talmud. And then she'asani ben or bat Chorin, who has made me a free person instead of a slave, because they're doing all of them in the positive. Ben Chorin, a free person. And finally, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzalmo, who has made me, God who has made me in God's image, in the divine image. So that's the way they appear in our Sidur. But just one last thing, even appearing in our Sidur, you can tell that they appear in a way that breaks up the distinguishing between day and night should naturally go to giving sight to the blind, right? So there's been a lot of work over the years to recontextualize this or reformulate it or retranslate it or reword it, but all of those attempts don't hide the fact that these blessings are an insertion and they are an addition to, and maybe now this is a nice addition to, but it's an addition to the real purpose of the morning blessings, which is to reenact that kind of movement through the early events of the morning, and to move through our mornings with a blessing consciousness, with a gratitude consciousness, with a God consciousness. So hopefully we can all attach ourselves to that aspect of the ritual, and maybe have a better appreciation for the parts of it that have been jarring to us in the past. Thank you, everybody. I leave you with that. and wish you a good rest of your week. Good learning with you.